Marcus Thompson stepped off the train in Valdoria with his usual swagger. The 28-year-old American had been traveling across Europe for 3 years, and he thought he knew everything about the world. His backpack was covered with patches from different countries, and his phone was always ready to capture the next viral moment that would make him internet famous. Valdoria was a small kingdom tucked away between Switzerland and Austria. Most people had never heard of it, but Marcus had come here because his travel blog followers wanted to see something different. The kingdom was famous for keeping old traditions alive, especially the royal guard ceremonies that happened every day in the main square. As Marcus walked through the cobblestone streets, he immediately started complaining. The buildings were too old-fashioned. The people dressed too formally. Everything moved too slowly for his liking. He was used to big cities where everything happened fast and loud. This quiet little kingdom felt boring to him. Marcus had always been the type of person who believed rules were made for other people, not for him. Back home in California, his parents had given him everything he wanted. He never had to work hard for anything, and he thought his American passport made him special wherever he went. When restaurant servers did not speak perfect English, he got angry. When museums had dress codes, he ignored them. When locals asked tourists to be respectful, he laughed at them. His social media accounts were full of videos where he made fun of local customs and traditions. He called it cultural commentary, but really it was just him being rude for attention. His followers loved it because it made them feel superior to people from other countries. Marcus had built his entire online personality around being the loud American who did whatever he wanted. The first thing Marcus noticed about Valdoria was how seriously everyone took their traditions. People dressed nicely when they went to the town square. Children were taught to speak quietly in public places. Even tourists seemed to follow the local customs without being asked. This annoyed Marcus because he wanted to stand out and be noticed. He checked into his hotel and immediately started planning his content for the week. The hotel manager had mentioned the Royal Guard ceremony that happened every day at noon. Marcus looked it up online and saw pictures of soldiers in fancy uniforms standing perfectly still while tourists watched. He rolled his eyes and thought it looked ridiculous. That evening, Marcus went to a local restaurant for dinner. The other customers were eating quietly and having polite conversations. The servers moved gracefully between tables and everyone seemed content. Marcus hated it. He wanted noise and excitement and drama. He started talking loudly on his phone about how boring this place was. An elderly man at the next table politely asked Marcus to lower his voice because other people were trying to enjoy their meals. Marcus pretended not to understand and kept talking even louder. The elderly man shook his head sadly and went back to his dinner. Marcus filmed the whole interaction and posted it online with the caption about how uptight Europeans were. As Marcus walked back to his hotel, he passed the palace square where the Royal Guard ceremony would happen the next day. Even at night, the place felt sacred and important. There were bronze plaques explaining the history of the Guard and how they had protected the royal family for over 300 years. Marcus read one of the plaques and laughed out loud. He thought the whole thing was just a show for tourists. Real soldiers did not stand around in fancy costumes letting people take pictures. Real soldiers fought wars and carried modern weapons. These guards looked like actors in a museum display. Marcus decided right then that he would make these so-called soldiers the star of his next viral video. He had no idea that his disrespectful attitude had already been noticed by people who took their duties very seriously. The kingdom was small and word traveled fast about rude tourists. But Marcus was too busy planning his next stunt to pay attention to the quiet disapproval around him. Tomorrow would be the day he showed the world how silly these traditional ceremonies really were. The next morning, Marcus woke up excited about his plan. He grabbed his phone and camera and headed straight to the palace square. It was 11:30 in the morning and tourists were already gathering behind the red rope barriers that surrounded the ceremonial area. Marcus looked around at the other visitors and felt annoyed by how respectful they were being. Families with children spoke in whispers. Elderly couples held hands and watched with genuine interest. Even teenage tourists seemed to understand that this was something special and important. The palace square itself was beautiful in a way that Marcus refused to appreciate. Ancient stone buildings surrounded the open area, and flags from the kingdom hung proudly from tall poles. Everything was perfectly clean and maintained. Fresh flowers decorated the corners, and the cobblestones looked like they had been polished that morning. At exactly 11:45, the royal guards began to march into position. There were 6 of them, and they moved with perfect coordination. Their uniforms were deep blue with gold braiding that caught the sunlight. Each guard wore a tall black hat made of real bearskin, and their boots clicked against the stones in perfect rhythm. Marcus watched them take their positions and had to admit they looked impressive. But he quickly pushed that thought away, because it did not fit with his plan to mock them. He noticed that their faces were completely serious and focused. They stared straight ahead and did not react to anything happening around them. The ceremony began with the captain of the guard reading a declaration in the local language. His voice was strong and clear, and even though Marcus could not understand the words, he could tell they were important. The tourists listened respectfully, and some people even removed their hats during certain parts. Then came the part that fascinated Marcus the most. The guards stood completely still for 20 minutes while tourists took pictures and watched. They did not blink more than necessary. They did not shift their weight or adjust their uniforms. They looked like perfectly trained statues that happened to be breathing. Marcus tested them by walking closer to the rope barrier and making faces. The guards did not react at all. He waved his arms around and made funny noises, but their expressions never changed. Other tourists started giving Marcus dirty looks and telling him to stop, but he ignored them completely. A security guard approached Marcus and politely asked him to stay behind the barriers and be respectful during the ceremony. Marcus pretended not to understand English and kept taking pictures from inappropriate angles. The security guard looked frustrated, but did not want to cause a scene during the sacred ceremony. The changing of the guard happened next, and it was like watching a perfectly choreographed dance. The new guards marched in while the old guards marched out. Every step was precise and meaningful. The handoff of duties was done with ceremony and respect that had been practiced for hundreds of years. Marcus filmed everything, but he was already thinking about how he would edit the video to make it look silly. He planned to add funny sound effects and speed up certain parts to make the guards look ridiculous. He would focus on their serious faces and make jokes about how they were probably thinking about lunch or their girlfriends. When the ceremony ended, the tourists began to leave quietly. Many of them seemed moved by what they had witnessed. Parents explained to their children about tradition and honor and service, but Marcus felt nothing except excitement about his upcoming viral video. He did not notice that one of the guards had made eye contact with him for just a split second before marching away. He did not see the security cameras that had recorded his disrespectful behavior, and he definitely did not know that someone very important had been watching him from a window high above the square. Tomorrow, Marcus would return with a much bolder plan to disrupt the ceremony and get the reaction he wanted for his social media fame. Marcus returned to the palace square the next day with his phone fully charged and ready to create the viral content he had been dreaming about. He arrived early to get the best position and immediately noticed that more tourists than usual had gathered to watch the ceremony. This time Marcus had come prepared with props. He had bought a fake mustache and a feather from a novelty shop in town. His plan was to make the guards break their serious composure and react to his antics. He was convinced that nobody could stay perfectly still while being actively bothered by a determined troublemaker. As the ceremony began, Marcus positioned himself right at the front of the crowd near the rope barriers. He started his phone recording and began making exaggerated facial expressions at the camera while the guards marched into position. Several families with children moved away from him because his behavior was making them uncomfortable. When the guards took their positions, Marcus saw his opportunity. He quickly ducked under the rope barrier before anyone could stop him and walked directly up to the closest guard. The crowd gasped, and several people called out for him to stop, but Marcus was too excited to listen. The guard Marcus approached was tall and muscular, with a perfectly trimmed beard visible under his ceremonial hat. His eyes stared straight ahead, and his jaw was set in a firm line. Marcus waved his hand in front of the guard's face and got no reaction at all. Encouraged by what he saw as weakness, Marcus began making silly faces just inches from the guard's nose. He stuck out his tongue and crossed his eyes while filming himself with his phone. The guard's breathing remained steady and controlled. His posture never shifted even slightly. Marcus pulled out the fake mustache and tried to stick it on the guard's face. The guard's jaw muscles tightened almost invisibly, but he remained perfectly still. This tiny reaction excited Marcus even more because he thought he was winning some kind of game. The crowd was getting more upset by the minute. An elderly woman was crying because Marcus was ruining something that meant a lot to her. Children were asking their parents why the man was being so mean to the soldier. Tour guides were apologizing to their groups for the disruption. Security guards were trying to approach Marcus, but they had to move carefully because they did not want to disturb the ceremony any more than necessary. The sacred ritual was supposed to continue no matter what happened around it, and rushing in with force would have made things worse. Marcus then pulled out his feather and began tickling the guard's chin while laughing hysterically. He was filming everything and providing commentary for his future video about how these so-called soldiers were just pretending to be tough. The guard's nostrils flared slightly, but his eyes never moved from their fixed position. Finally, security managed to escort Marcus away from the ceremonial area. He was not arrested, but he was firmly told that he was no longer welcome at the palace square during ceremonies. Marcus protested loudly, claiming that he was just having fun, and that the guards were being too serious about their silly job. As Marcus was led away, he felt triumphant. He had gotten exactly the footage he wanted, and he was already planning how to edit it for maximum viral impact. He would add funny music and sound effects, and make jokes about how the guard had been trying so hard not to laugh. What Marcus did not know was that his entire performance had been recorded by high-definition security cameras from multiple angles. Every moment of disrespect had been captured and was already being reviewed by people who took their duties very seriously. The wheels of justice were beginning to turn, but they moved quietly and carefully, just like the guards Marcus had mocked. Captain Henrik Volkov sat in his office watching the security footage of Marcus's shameful behavior. The captain was 52 years old with silver hair and steel-gray eyes that had seen many battles. He had served in the Royal Guard for 22 years and had never encountered such blatant disrespect for their sacred traditions. The captain's office was filled with medals and certificates from his years of service. Photos on his desk showed him with members of the royal family and visiting dignitaries from around the world. Everyone who knew Captain Volkov respected his dedication to duty and his brilliant strategic mind. As the captain watched Marcus tickle his guard's chin, he felt a cold anger building inside him. But Henrik Volkov was not a man who acted on emotion. He was patient and calculating, and he believed that every action should have a purpose. Destroying Marcus would be easy, but teaching him a lesson would be much more satisfying. The captain picked up his phone and began making calls. His first call was to his old friend Maria, who managed the Grand Hotel where Marcus was staying. Maria had worked in hospitality for 30 years, and she understood the importance of maintaining the kingdom's reputation. Next, he called Roberto, who owned 3 of the most popular restaurants in the city center. Roberto's family had been serving traditional food to locals and tourists for 4 generations. He took great pride in his establishment and did not appreciate customers who disrespected local customs. The captain then contacted Elena, who ran the city's main taxi service. Elena's drivers knew every street in Valdoria, and they had a reputation for being helpful and reliable. But they also had a strong sense of community loyalty and did not like people who made their city look bad. His fourth call was to David at the train station. David had been working in transportation for 15 years, and he controlled the computer systems that managed ticket sales and passenger information. He was also a veteran who had served under Captain Volkov years earlier. Finally, the captain called his cousin Anna, who worked at the telephone company. Anna had access to the systems that controlled phone signals and internet connections throughout the city. She had always been proud of her cousin's military service, and she trusted his judgment completely. Each person the captain called listened carefully to his plan. None of them were asked to do anything illegal or harmful. They were simply being asked to follow certain procedures and protocols that were already within their authority to implement. The captain was very clear that Marcus should not be hurt or threatened in any way. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Marcus would find himself facing a series of small but frustrating obstacles that would make his stay in Valdoria increasingly difficult. Each problem would seem like a coincidence or a minor technical issue. No one would be able to prove that anything deliberate was happening. Captain Volkov had learned during his military career that the most effective strategies were often the quietest ones. Big dramatic actions got attention, but small persistent pressure could be much more powerful. He wanted Marcus to understand what it felt like to be powerless and frustrated. The captain also made sure that Marcus's disrespectful video would not spread beyond the kingdom. He contacted the local internet service providers and arranged for certain social media uploads to be delayed or blocked due to technical difficulties. This was presented as routine maintenance and security protocols. By evening, Captain Volkov had assembled a network of ordinary citizens who were willing to help teach Marcus about respect and consequences. None of them knew the full extent of the plan, but each person understood their role. They were all motivated by pride in their community and anger at how their traditions had been mocked. The captain spent the rest of the night reviewing the details of his strategy. He wanted to make sure that Marcus would learn his lesson without anyone being able to accuse the royal guard of harassment or abuse. Everything had to appear natural and coincidental. As he prepared to leave his office, Captain Volkov looked once more at the security footage of Marcus's behavior. He felt confident that justice would be served and that the honor of the royal guard would be restored. The American tourist was about to discover that actions have consequences even when you think nobody important is watching. Tomorrow, Marcus would wake up to find that his comfortable tourist experience was about to become much more challenging. Marcus woke up the next morning feeling excited about editing his viral video. He had spent the previous evening uploading the footage to his laptop and planning how to make it as funny and disrespectful as possible. But when he tried to leave his hotel room, he discovered that his key card was not working. The first time the card failed, Marcus thought it was just a simple mistake. Hotel key cards stopped working sometimes, and it was usually an easy fix. But when he went to the front desk, the young clerk looked genuinely confused and apologetic. Maria, the hotel manager, appeared and explained that there had been a computer system error during the night. Marcus's reservation had somehow been canceled, and his room was now showing as available for new guests. She seemed very sorry about the problem, but said there was nothing she could do to fix it immediately. Marcus demanded to speak to someone in charge, but Maria explained that she was the manager and a computer technician would not be available until later in the week. She offered to help him find another hotel, but warned him that this was peak tourist season, and most places were fully booked. Frustrated but not yet worried, Marcus gathered his belongings and started calling other hotels in the city. Every place he contacted gave him the same answer. They were completely booked with no rooms available for at least a week. Some of the hotel clerks sounded genuinely sorry, while others seemed less interested in helping an obviously upset American tourist. By noon, Marcus was getting hungry and decided to grab lunch before continuing his search for accommodation. He went to a nice restaurant near the Palace Square and ordered a traditional meal. When it came time to pay, his credit card was declined. The waiter apologized and suggested that Marcus try a different card, but his backup credit card was also declined. Then his debit card failed as well. The restaurant manager came over and politely suggested that Marcus contact his bank to resolve the issue. Marcus tried calling his bank, but discovered that his phone had no signal anywhere in the restaurant. He walked outside and found that he had no signal on the street either. When he asked other tourists about phone service, they said theirs was working fine. Getting more frustrated, Marcus found an internet cafe and tried to log into his online banking. The computers were working for other customers, but every time Marcus tried to access a website, the connection would time out or give him error messages. The cafe owner apologized and said they were having technical difficulties with certain international sites. Marcus spent the afternoon walking around the city trying to solve his problems. Every ATM he tried gave him error messages. His credit cards were declined at shops and restaurants throughout the downtown area. Even when he offered to pay cash for a simple sandwich, the vendor claimed he could not make change for large bills. As evening approached, Marcus realized he had no place to sleep and no way to buy food. He had eaten nothing since breakfast, and his phone battery was dying. Every charging station he found was either broken or occupied by other tourists who seemed to take forever to finish using them. Marcus tried to call his parents in California for help, but could not get an international connection. The phone company office was closed and would not reopen until Monday. When he asked other tourists about making international calls, they showed him that their phones worked perfectly fine. Desperate and confused, Marcus returned to his original hotel, hoping that Maria had found a solution to his reservation problem. But Maria was off duty, and the night clerk claimed to have no record of Marcus ever staying there. All of his belongings had been moved to the lost and found area. The night clerk was polite but firm about hotel policy. Marcus could retrieve his luggage, but since he was not a registered guest, he could not stay in the building. Security would escort him out if he tried to sleep in the lobby. Marcus found himself standing on the street with his backpack and suitcase, wondering what had gone wrong. Every problem seemed like a coincidence or a technical error, but together they were making his life miserable. He had gone from being a confident traveler to being homeless and broke in less than 12 hours. The irony was not lost on him that he was now as powerless as the guards he had mocked. But Marcus was too proud and too stubborn to make the connection between his behavior and his current situation. He assumed he was just having a run of bad luck that would end soon. As he searched for a place to spend the night, Marcus had no idea that his troubles were just beginning. The network of citizens that Captain Volkov had organized was just getting started with their quiet campaign of justice. Marcus spent a cold, uncomfortable night sleeping on a bench in the public park. He woke up stiff and hungry with his clothes wrinkled and his hair messy. Other tourists walking by gave him strange looks because he no longer looked like someone who belonged in this upscale kingdom. His first priority was getting out of Valdoria as quickly as possible. Marcus was convinced that all his problems were caused by the city's outdated computer systems and poor infrastructure. He decided to cut his visit short and move on to the next destination on his travel itinerary. Marcus walked to the train station with his luggage and approached the ticket counter. The clerk was a middle-aged man named David who seemed friendly and professional. But when Marcus tried to buy a ticket to Switzerland, David frowned at his computer screen. David explained that Marcus's credit card had been flagged in their system for irregular purchase patterns. This sometimes happened when people tried to buy expensive tickets quickly after having payment problems elsewhere. Bank security protocols required additional verification before the purchase could be approved. Marcus would need to provide extra identification documents and wait for manual approval from the bank. This process could take anywhere from 2 to 5 business days. David seemed genuinely sorry about the inconvenience, but said these security measures were designed to protect customers from fraud. Frustrated, Marcus tried to pay cash for his ticket, but David explained that cash purchases over a certain amount also required special documentation for international travel security reasons. Marcus would need papers from his embassy proving his identity and travel purpose. The American embassy was located in the capital city 3 hours away and was only open on weekdays by appointment. Marcus realized he would be stuck in Valdoria for at least several days while he sorted out all the bureaucratic requirements. Marcus decided to try the bus station instead. Surely local bus travel would have fewer restrictions than international trains. But when he arrived at the bus terminal, he found that every departure to neighboring countries had been canceled due to road construction and weather concerns. The bus station manager showed Marcus an official notice explaining that mountain highways were closed for maintenance until further notice. Local routes within the kingdom were still running, but those would not help Marcus leave the country. Getting desperate, Marcus tried to rent a car. The rental office was modern and well-equipped, but the agent behind the counter could not find Marcus's driving license in any of their approved databases. Without proper license verification, they could not rent him a vehicle. Marcus showed his physical license, but the agent explained that their insurance required electronic confirmation through international driving databases. The system seemed to be having connectivity issues, specifically with American license records. Even taxi drivers claimed they were not allowed to take passengers outside the city limits without special permits. The permits were issued by a government office that was closed for the week due to a local holiday that Marcus had never heard of. Marcus tried using ride-sharing apps on his phone, but none of them seemed to work in Valdoria. The apps would load, but no drivers were ever available for trips leaving the city. Local rides within the kingdom worked fine for other tourists, but Marcus could not even get those to accept his payment methods. By afternoon, Marcus was getting paranoid. Every system failure seemed designed specifically to keep him trapped in this small kingdom. But whenever he complained to local officials, they showed him paperwork and regulations that seemed legitimate. The strangest part was how polite and apologetic everyone was. Nobody was rude or hostile toward Marcus. They all claimed to want to help him, but their computer systems and regulations always prevented them from actually solving his problems. Marcus tried contacting the American embassy by phone, but could never get through to a human representative. The automated system would put him on hold for hours and then disconnect his call. His emails to the embassy bounced back with delivery failure messages. When Marcus tried to post about his situation on social media, his accounts kept getting suspended for violating community guidelines. His posts about being trapped in Valdoria were flagged as potential spam or misinformation, even though he was telling the truth about his experience. His family and friends back home in California could not reach him because their messages and calls never seemed to get through. Marcus was becoming invisible to the outside world, just like the guards he had mocked were trained to ignore outside distractions. As his third day in this nightmare began, Marcus finally started to suspect that something deliberate was happening to him. But he still could not prove anything because every obstacle seemed legitimate, and every official had a reasonable explanation for why they could not help him. Marcus was learning what it felt like to be completely powerless in a situation where all the rules were controlled by other people. By his fourth day in Valdoria, Marcus looked completely different from the confident tourist who had arrived earlier that week. His clothes were dirty from sleeping outside. His hair was messy, and he had not shaved in days. Other tourists avoided him because he looked like a homeless person rather than a fellow traveler. Marcus had been surviving on scraps of food and water from public fountains. Every attempt to buy a proper meal had failed because of payment system errors or restaurant policies that seemed designed to exclude him specifically. He was getting weaker and more desperate with each passing hour. The psychological pressure was starting to break him down. Marcus had always been someone who solved problems with money or attitude or connections. But here in Valdoria, all of his usual advantages were useless. He felt completely helpless for the first time in his adult life. In his desperation, Marcus decided to return to the palace square where this whole nightmare had started. Maybe he could find someone there who would listen to his story and help him contact the outside world. Maybe he could convince the security guards that he had learned his lesson and just wanted to go home. As Marcus approached the ceremonial area, he noticed that something was different. There was a larger crowd than usual gathered around the square, but they were not watching the changing of the guard ceremony. Instead, they were all looking at something new that had been installed overnight. Marcus pushed through the crowd to see what was attracting so much attention. What he saw made his blood run cold and his knees go weak. There in the center of the square was a brand new bronze statue mounted on a marble pedestal. The statue showed a foolish-looking tourist pointing disrespectfully at a dignified guard. The tourist figure was clearly meant to be Marcus. The sculptor had captured his arrogant expression and his rude gesture perfectly. Even his backpack and casual clothes were reproduced in bronze. The marble pedestal had a brass plaque with words engraved in both the local language and English. The English version read "Monument to Ignorance," a reminder that some lessons must be learned the hard way. The statue had been created and installed with incredible speed and skill. Marcus stared at his own bronze face in horror. The crowd around him was laughing and taking selfies with the statue, just like he had done with the living guard. Children were pointing at the bronze tourist and asking their parents why the man in the statue was being so mean. Several tourists recognized Marcus as the real person who had inspired the statue. They whispered among themselves, and some of them took photos comparing Marcus's current disheveled appearance to his bronze representation. The contrast was both sad and humiliating. An elderly woman approached Marcus and spoke to him in accented English. She explained that she had been at the ceremony when he disrupted it, and that his behavior had made her cry. She said the statue was a perfect way to remember why people should treat traditions with respect. Marcus wanted to run away, but he felt frozen in place. Seeing himself immortalized as a symbol of ignorance and disrespect was more painful than all the practical problems he had been facing. This statue would remain in the square long after he was gone. The worst part was realizing that his viral video had been turned against him. Instead of making the guards look foolish, he had made himself into a permanent laughingstock. The very fame he had been seeking was now his greatest source of shame. Marcus noticed that the statue had been positioned so that the bronze guard appeared calm and dignified, while the bronze tourist looked petty and small. The sculptor had captured the real truth about what had happened during the ceremony. As Marcus stood there staring at his bronze shame, a man in civilian clothes approached him. The man was tall and distinguished, looking with silver hair and military bearing. He introduced himself politely and invited Marcus to join him for coffee at a nearby cafe. The man spoke perfect English and seemed genuinely interested in having a conversation. After days of being ignored and dismissed, Marcus was grateful for any human contact. He had no idea that he was about to meet the architect of all his recent troubles. The distinguished man led Marcus to a quiet coffee shop away from the busy square. Marcus was grateful for the invitation because he had not had a real conversation with anyone in days. The man ordered coffee for both of them and seemed genuinely interested in making Marcus feel comfortable. Marcus studied his companion carefully. The man had perfect posture and moved with military precision, but he was dressed in civilian clothes. His silver hair was perfectly groomed, and his steel gray eyes seemed to see everything. There was something about him that commanded respect without being threatening. The man introduced himself as Henrik Volkov and explained that he had been watching Marcus's situation with interest. He spoke in a calm, measured voice that suggested he was used to being in control of difficult situations. Marcus felt both relieved and nervous about finally meeting someone who seemed willing to help. Henrik asked Marcus to tell him about his experiences in Valdoria. Marcus poured out his story about all the system failures and bureaucratic obstacles that had trapped him in the kingdom. He described his frustration with the hotel computers and the payment problems and the transportation issues. As Marcus spoke, Henrik listened carefully and asked thoughtful questions. He seemed genuinely concerned about Marcus's welfare and sympathetic to his difficulties. Marcus began to hope that he had finally found someone with the authority and connections to solve his problems. When Marcus finished his story, Henrik sat quietly for a moment, as if considering everything he had heard. Then he began to speak in the same calm voice, but with a new intensity that made Marcus pay close attention. Henrik explained that he was Captain Henrik Volkov, the head of the Royal Guard. He had served for 22 years protecting the traditions and honor of the kingdom. He had watched Marcus's disrespectful behavior at the ceremony and had been deeply offended by the mockery of his men. Marcus felt his stomach drop as he realized who he was talking to. The man across from him was not a helpful stranger, but the person responsible for everything that had happened to him. Marcus started to stand up, but Henrik gestured for him to remain seated. The captain explained his strategy in detail. Every obstacle Marcus had encountered had been carefully planned and executed. The hotel computer problems, the payment failures, the transportation issues, and the communication breakdowns had all been arranged through Henrik's network of contacts throughout the city. None of it had been illegal or harmful. Henrik had simply used his connections to ensure that various systems and procedures worked exactly as they were supposed to work. Credit card security protocols had been followed precisely. Hotel computer systems had experienced routine maintenance issues. Transportation regulations had been enforced completely. Marcus listened in amazement as Henrik described how he had coordinated dozens of people and systems to create the perfect trap. The captain had used his military training and strategic thinking to design a campaign that was both effective and impossible to prove. Henrik explained that this was not about punishment but about education. Marcus had treated the Royal Guard like entertainment, so he needed to learn what it felt like to be powerless. The guards had to stand still and endure mockery as part of their duty, but Marcus had no such training or discipline. The captain revealed that the bronze statue had been his masterpiece. He had commissioned it from a local artist who had worked from the security camera footage of Marcus's behavior. The statue would serve as a permanent reminder about the importance of respecting local customs and traditions. Marcus finally understood the full scope of what had been done to him. Every frustration and obstacle had been part of a larger plan designed to teach him humility. The captain had turned his own disrespectful behavior against him in the most elegant way possible. Henrik explained that Marcus now had a choice. He could continue to struggle against the invisible barriers that had been placed around him, or he could make things right. There was a way out of his situation, but it would require genuine humility and public acknowledgement of his mistakes. The captain offered Marcus a chance to redeem himself through a sincere public apology. If Marcus was willing to admit his errors and show real respect for the Royal Guard and the kingdom's traditions, then all of his problems would disappear as quickly as they had appeared. Marcus sat in silence for several minutes, processing everything Captain Volkov had told him. The full weight of his situation was finally clear. He had not been the victim of bad luck or technical failures. He had been outmaneuvered by a master strategist who had turned his own arrogance against him. For the first time in his adult life, Marcus felt genuine humility. He had always believed that his confidence and boldness were strengths, but now he understood how they had become weaknesses. His disrespect for others had made him enemies he never knew he had. Marcus looked at Captain Volkov and saw the quiet dignity that he had missed in the Royal Guards. These were not performers or tourist attractions. They were real soldiers with real honor who deserved real respect. Marcus had treated them like objects for his entertainment, and now he was paying the price. The captain waited patiently while Marcus struggled with his emotions. There was no anger or cruelty in Henrik's face, just the calm determination of someone who was committed to doing the right thing. Marcus realized that even now the captain was trying to help him become a better person. Marcus finally spoke in a voice that was barely above a whisper. He told Captain Volkov that he understood what he had done wrong and that he was ready to make it right. He asked what he needed to do to earn forgiveness and repair the damage he had caused. Henrik explained that Marcus would need to make a sincere public apology in the same place where he had caused the original offense. Local media would be present, and Marcus would need to speak from his heart about what he had learned. This was not about humiliation but about education for other tourists who might make similar mistakes. 2 hours later, Marcus stood in the palace square where his nightmare had begun. A small crowd had gathered, including several news reporters and many of the people who had witnessed his original disrespectful behavior. Captain Volkov stood nearby in his full military uniform, looking dignified and professional. Marcus had cleaned himself up and put on his best clothes. His hand shook as he prepared to speak, but his voice was clear and strong. He began by apologizing directly to the Royal Guards for mocking their sacred traditions and treating them with disrespect. Marcus explained how his experience in Valdoria had taught him about the importance of cultural sensitivity and personal responsibility. He described how his arrogance had blinded him to the real meaning of the ceremony and the dedication of the guards who performed it. He spoke about learning the difference between confidence and arrogance, between humor and cruelty, between entertainment and respect. Marcus admitted that he had come to Valdoria looking for content for his social media, but had instead found a lesson about character and dignity. The crowd listened carefully to Marcus's words. Some people seemed moved by his obvious sincerity, while others remained skeptical about whether his change of heart was genuine. Marcus did not blame them for their doubt, because he knew he had to earn their trust through actions, not just words. Captain Volkov stepped forward when Marcus finished speaking. In his clear military voice, he accepted the apology on behalf of the Royal Guard and the people of Valdoria. He spoke about the importance of learning from mistakes and growing as a person. Within hours of the public apology, Marcus's problems began to disappear. His hotel room became available again. His credit card started working normally. Transportation out of the city was suddenly possible. The invisible barriers that had trapped him for days vanished as quickly as they had appeared. The bronze statue was quietly removed from the square the next morning. It had served its purpose as a teaching tool and was no longer needed. The captain had achieved his goal of educating Marcus without causing permanent harm or humiliation. Marcus left Valdoria the following day, but he was a completely different person from the arrogant tourist who had arrived a week earlier. He had learned lessons about respect, tradition, and personal responsibility that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Years later, Marcus would tell this story to other travelers as a warning about the importance of cultural sensitivity. He always ended it the same way by saying, never underestimate the power of quiet dignity and never mistake stillness for weakness. The Royal Guards had taught him that true strength comes from discipline and honor, not from loud arrogance and disrespect. Marcus never forgot Captain Henrik Volkov and the masterful way he had turned a troublemaker into a teacher. The lesson had been delivered with precision and purpose, and it had changed Marcus's life forever.